In this episode of Hot Hardware's 2.5 Geeks, we're going to have a Core Ultra deep dive on Arrow Lake with none other than Intel's Robert Hallock. Next. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters. Dave Altavilla here for Hot Hardware and the 2.5 Geeks live stream. It's been a while since we've been with you, and we missed you, so we brought some really smart friends with us today. As always, I have Marco Chiappetta with me, but the illustrious and effervescent Marco Chiappetta, by the way. But also...
That's a big intro.
Yeah, man. Another guy who's effervescent and, as we say up here in the Northeast, wicked smart. It's Robert Hallock from Intel, Intel VP and GM, Client AI and Technical Marketing. Welcome back to the stream, brother.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
How have you been?
Well, last week I had pneumonia, so that part was bad.
That stinks.
Professionally, it's been an interesting month. We'll talk about that, I'm sure. But things have been good.
Cool. Yeah, no, we're running flat out here in the run up to CES. No rest for the wicked. Are you going to be in town for the show?
I will. Let's grab beers.
I was going to say there's more germs to be had in that town for you, by the way.
Like every year that I go, I'm like, okay, do I get COVID? Do I get flu? What am I going to get this year? It's just like a grab bag of badness.
Yeah. Well, you gotta go there all rested up with your vitamin D and your vitamin C on the ready, and then we all try and avoid the CES flu. But it's a lot of fun. 150,000 of your closest friends hanging out with you, geeking out.
Like once you're actually there, it's great. Like the lead up to CES, both I think for journalists and for those of us like inside the companies, CES is madness. It's such a rush. So much to do, but once you're actually there, it's great.
Yeah,
really great. It's one of my favorite events.
Yeah, you got all your favorite folks in town, from all your partners and all that good stuff. It's very efficient for folks like us because we can bounce around from meeting to meetings and get to see a lot of people in a very short period of time. So it's good stuff for sure. So Robert, let's start off real quick with who you are and what you do at Intel. You've had a little bit of a title change, but just folks who might not be familiar with you, you are Intel's VP and GM, Client AI and Technical Marketing. What does that role entail for you? I guess what's your purview there?
Yeah, so the day job is really focusing on consumer AI, which is right now it's just a lot of education. What is it? Why should anybody care? What's the point? And then long term, where does it go? And advocating for that. But when it comes to launches or events, it's things like press briefings and presentations and technical documents and communication with the media and enthusiasts.
Yeah. Good stuff, and keeps you busy, I would say. You've had
certainly does. No rest for the weary.
You've had a kind of a 1-2 punch of Lunar Lake and now Arrow Lake laptop and then desktop platform processors. You're probably catching your breath just for a little while, and then there's more to come, I'm sure, around CES time.
I mean, we're already in CES planning, right? So it's Lunar, a month later Arrow, and then immediately on to CES. So it's just the way it goes.
There you go.
For everybody. Marco, Dave, I'm sure you're both doing the same.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The holidays are kind of a blur for us, frankly, lately, it seems, but that's okay.
For true.
We take time other times during the year. Marco, why don't you set the ground rules here for folks in the chat? We do have the ability to field questions for Robert from the audience. Would like to have an open, frank dialogue here and get some of your questions asked. But Marco, why don't you dive in and let us know how this thing's going to roll?
Sure. So you know what? Why don't we set the stage for everybody? Obviously, Intel recently launched Arrow Lake S, the Core Ultra 200S series for desktops. And it's a complete departure from previous gen Intel desktop processors. And as a result, some of the numbers were perhaps not what people were expecting. Some great stuff, some not so great stuff. So we wanted to just have a discussion, see what Robert thinks about the Arrow Lake launch, and get some feedback from everybody watching, from readers, from Hot Hardware, and just see where the conversation takes us. So I think that's where we're gonna kick things off. We're gonna keep things civil. We're not clickbaity over here. We're not going to throw some crazy title in there just to get clicks. Let's have a great conversation when we have access to somebody like Robert from Inside Intel. And if you have questions that you want to get answered, please ask them in the chat. If you want to ask questions live, YouTube is the place to do it. We're probably not going to see feedback from LinkedIn or X. So head on over to our YouTube channel if you want to participate live. And with that, I think we'll kick it off with a simple question for Robert. Robert, what do you think about the Arrow Lake S launch, and what struck you once the chip was out in the wild?
There's this old adage that we've talked about, journalists and hardware companies alike, that a new platform is hard. Like anytime you radically overhaul anything, it presents new and sometimes unexpected challenges. And I think what people have been interested to hear is what happened. And I can't go into all the details yet, but we've identified a series of issues, multi-factor. They're at the OS level, they're at the BIOS level. And I will say that the performance we saw in reviews, and to be very clear, through no fault of reviewers, was not what we expected and not what we intended. The launch just didn't go as planned. And that's been a humbling lesson for all of us, and has kind of inspired a fairly large response internally to get to the bottom of what happened and to fix it. I think the bones are solid of Arrow Lake. It is. I truly believe that it is fundamentally a good part. It delivers power consumption reductions that we really needed to make across our entire portfolio. Has a ton of new and interesting overclocking knobs and dials, which I've started to tinker with, and I really enjoy that. And I think the performance is solid. But that's not what people saw, right? So there's a disconnect between what we measured prior to launching this thing and what reviewers actually saw when they got their hands on the platform. And again, it wasn't their fault. We have a number of things we got to go fix, and that's the long and short of it.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'm gonna share this out, just so we have it to the side of us here. Hang on one sec, Marco. Let's go to. Can I present this now? Let's see. Present. Oh boy.
Well, while you're going to present the article, something that I noticed in testing that I think sort of played out once we went through the battery of tests, and there's a question we got on the site about why move the memory controller so far away and introduce latency. And I did see relatively high memory latency, also saw relatively high cache latency, but really strong single thread performance. But when we got to gaming, the gaming numbers weren't quite what I expected. Was that sort of higher than expected latency? Is that part of the reason that the gaming numbers weren't quite as high as expected?
No, but that is an easy conclusion to make, right? Like there are past lessons on other CPUs that would lead you to that conclusion pretty easily, because nobody, like the problem space is actually multi-factor. We're tracking a couple of issues internally that can combine to produce some pretty wild unintended effects. We saw in one combination, one potential hypothetical scenario of these things going wrong. Actually, let me start over. There's kind of like a matrix of possibilities of what didn't work correctly, and depending on where you were in that matrix, based on your motherboard, OS settings, whatever, the outcomes could be pretty different. And so on one combination, I saw memory latency as high as 180 nanoseconds. Wow. And that is so far off of what we were anticipating or measuring. we think that this platform fundamentally is like a 70, 80, 85 nanosecond memory latency product, which is, in the hunt for modern gaming CPUs. It's like right there with modern gaming CPUs. So, but I understand the instinct to go to memory latency first. But the reality is there were BIOS, firmware, OS level issues that we need to solve. And I know people are like, okay, what are they? I can't say that yet, but my commitment to you guys and to reviewers at large and to users is we're going to come back with a full audit, an itemized list, and we're going to explain every single one of these. What was the perf cost, what exactly happened, and what we're going to do to fix it.
Awesome. That's great. And let's back up a little bit for folks that might not be fully in the know. This is the family of processors here on the screen. This marks a completely new architecture for Intel on the desktop. This is a tiled chiplet style architecture combined with 3D chip stacking. And so it's a very different type of chip architecture than we've seen in the past, monolithic chips from Intel. So disaggregated, we have now certainly E-cores and P-cores, but no more hyper-threading as well, no more symmetric multi-threading on board. And that's an interesting takeaway we should dive into a little bit, Robert. But before and I do want to circle back to what you guys think you can do moving forward, but the move away from hyper-threading, let's talk about that a little bit. SMT, obviously you folks did the trade-off in terms of whether it's performance or power consumption, performance, power, what have you, for or not to do SMT. What were your decision makings there?
Sure. I think SMT is, like, this is my personal opinion. Even though SMT has been around forever, seemingly forever in CPUs, I actually kind of feel it's a relic of an older time. It comes from an era where CPU pipelines were very long and prone to stalls or bubbles, and you needed some way to fill in the work or fill in the dead time with different instructions, different threads. And those aren't really the kind of CPUs being made anymore. And SMT is still good for sustained multi-thread cases, but I think Arrow Lake is actually a nice example that it doesn't always matter, right? We delivered 24 threads with the highest Core Ultra 9 285K that you see on the top here, and that ended up being noticeably faster than the 32 thread Raptor Lake part. Right. So we're trying to design cores that give you this is the bottom line. We're trying to design cores that give you SMT worth of performance benefit without the cost of SMT, because SMT costs money both for us and for you. It makes the die size bigger. It increases power consumption, and SMT has also been a source of frankly security concerns. Right, many of the software attacks that we've seen over the last 10 years have exploited SMT as an industry-wide technology. So, if you want to make a product more affordable, if you want to make it lower power and more secure, we actually think we can do that without SMT with the cores that we're building. So, what we're trying to say is we're entering a different era here, a different way to think about how multi-threaded performance can be delivered, and we think we can do it without SMT, plain and simple.
Yeah, when you can squeeze 24 cores on a chip, top end, you can get some pretty good threading there. Anyways, so good stuff.
Yeah, and just before you guys move on, if our numbers, the 285K was the fastest in Cinebench with lower thread count than competing processors. So that's right. That's while that's SMT
living proof of what I'm talking about.
Right, like SMT can help with some workloads when those pipelines aren't fully utilized, but when you're banging on them 100% with some workloads that will exploit the core technologies, performance is there. So sorry, go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, no. It's, I think I was rapping on that, and it's good to get Robert's insight. I think you hit the nail on the head, Robert, about it being. It seems like kind of old tech now. It was a fix or a solution for the days when we only had 2 to 4 cores per processor, and we needed a few more resources. So makes perfect sense to me as well.
And I will also say it doesn't necessarily mean SMT is a bad technology either, right? There could be a hypothetical other universe where the architecture design is different and it does need or does benefit from the performance improvement of SMT, but that's just not the direction we want to go with the architecture design.
Right.
Yep.
Right. All right, Marco.
So-
We've accumulated some things in the chat. Where do you want to go next, bud?
Well, I want to actually I want to riff off the question we just covered here. So
Okay.
I know that there's power savings right without SMT. I'm probably going to get flack for this. I personally don't care how much power my desktop uses. Right, the coolers are more than capable.
Fair.
And in my testing, right, you guys were I forget the exact number. It was like 50 watts lower than the 14900K system. While that that sounds great. It's like wow, 285K was 50 watts lower than the previous flagship, but isn't that just leaving performance on the table if you're not taking advantage of all the power available to you guys?
I tend to think of it as a bit of a kind of a bit of a sliding window, if you will, that sometimes you can throw a lot of extra watts at performance and you just don't get a lot of extra performance in return. And sometimes that can lead to online chatter or review conclusions like, oh, it's not power efficient or it's not efficient, or complaints like, why did I'm going to give a hypothetical example, but why did Intel give 50 extra watts to this part when it doesn't give you much more than 3 or 4% performance in return? Right.
Yeah.
So, power is actually a bit of a damned if you do, damned if you don't sometimes in this industry. Because if you do the thing to cut power, then you get these questions, right? Like, well, what if you had turned up power? Would you get more
Right.
performance? And sometimes yes, sometimes no. It depends
Yeah.
on the architecture.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So you guys struck that balance. You could have went higher, but there may have been some diminishing returns, so you kept it conservative there.
Net, that was our goal.
And
I mean,
that's very
we're also trying to learn from the lessons on Raptor Lake, right? Where in some motherboards, unconstrained power consumption was a problem,
Mhm.
right? And many review conclusions often said, wow, so much power, so hot. And those are lessons that we internalize and try to build a product that addresses the challenge that the community is laying before us, right? So if we see that kind of feedback time and time again in a review, we're going to try to build a product that removes that from the table. And that may create a different set of community concerns. But the key thing that the power consumption reset does is it gives our roadmap headroom, right? We're not bumping up against the limit anymore, right? So now as we start to design these future core architectures, we have headroom to play with. And perf per watt, as we all know, is like it's king. It's king. That's the fundamental truth of CPU and GPU performance. And that's what we're really trying to get right.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. That's an age old silicon issue, right? That those last few megahertz of clock speed cost you exponentially more power,
Right.
just to drive it. So that makes a whole lot of sense. Marco, we got a ton of stuff coming in the chat. Are you keeping track of this at all?
I am keeping track. A lot of it
Good.
is duplication from what we already got from HotHardware's comment section on the site. So let's address one that's just come up. I'm going to put this up because everybody knows this website asking this question.
There you go.
This was another question we got from the site as well about the potential longevity of the new socket. Robert, is there any comments that you can give if somebody buys this platform today? Are they going to be able to upgrade in the future? Is anything that you can provide?
I just don't know. I don't know the socket roadmap. Now, in general, I will say that there's actually a law, kind of a law about this. It is called, let's see, it's the Federal Trade Commission Regulation Fair Disclosure, and to disclose future roadmap elements you basically can't do that on a live stream, right? There are
Okay.
because that's a material disclosure that you would be making that might influence the revenue of your company and therefore shareholder value. And that's just the law of publicly traded companies.
Mhm.
So there are also limitations like procedurally or federally on what we can and cannot say about future roadmap. But as always, I would encourage people to choose the best product for them. At the end of the day, that's all we can do as users. Forget that I work at Intel. That's what I'm going to do as a buyer. That's what I encourage everybody else to do.
Yep. Yep. Fair enough. I
Gotcha.
think we had you years ago in another life, Robert. We had that same question for you when you were with AMD, and you gave a very similar answer. Can't really say about
It's just
the
the
roadmap.
reality,
I hope
unfortunately.
for the best.
Robert,
Yeah.
not even for us. Like, you won't break the law for us. Come on. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, my lawless days are over.
Yeah, I got you. I got you.
You and me both. You and me both. All right.
So we have the illustrious Paul Alcorn from Tom's in the chat asking,
Hey,
is there
Paul,
any
how you doing, buddy?
any ETA you can give on some of these fixes that you mentioned in the opening?
I hope to have a comprehensive update to folks like yourselves and Paul this month.
Excellent.
I can't say we're going to be like before November 30th. I hope so. Like things are. It's what day is it? It's like early in November. We're tracking a couple fixes, and the early indicators look good for November. But I'll be clear, that might miss by a week. It could be early December.
Mhm.
Gotcha. And obviously, Robert could only speak for fixes that Intel is working on themselves. And Robert, if I'm wrong, tell me if I'm wrong. I assume there's probably some things Microsoft may have to work on as well, and that timeline is going to be Microsoft's, correct?
No, actually, in defense of Microsoft, they get a lot of
Mhm.
flack every time there's a Windows update. People say, "Oh, scheduler this and performance that." Like I see it all the time, and in their defense, Arrow Lake is on us, right? There are fixes that need to be deployed through Windows Update, but that's just the deployment vehicle. That doesn't mean Microsoft is responsible, right? So I want to be
Gotcha.
very clear that we are accepting and internalizing the faults, that this is on us and we need to make it right.
Gotcha.
That's great.
And you may not be able to provide this detail, but I'm going to ask: is it fair to assume it's software and firmware, maybe some BIOS updates coming from other board
Correct.
partners as well? Yes.
That's right.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you. Sorry, Dave. Keep
Robert,
interrupting you.
I will also say
Yeah, that's right.
it's going to be pretty easy to resolve once we package it all up, right? It's like a flash the BIOS and update Windows kind of situation, like, which is not hard. There's nothing earth shattering.
Do you have like a top 2 or 3 you can share with us that you're looking to knock down, or you want to
Not
keep it
yet.
in your pocket?
Okay. I want to, when we do this, what I've asked the team for and what I'm driving towards is, of all the issues that we knew we found, thanks to the support of the reviewer community, I feel we are responsible for providing a performance digest of the impact on each of those issues. Like, go through them line by line. What happened? What is it? How do we fix it? And what did it cost in performance? And then what is the cumulative when you put everything together? That's what we're aiming to provide, November, December.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Cool. And you folks have a proven track record, actually, recently. If I think about that, a proven track record recently, especially with like the graphics division, where you're coming back, down the road with driver updates and optimizations that deliver more performance on the product. So, it's good. You have a good track record there. You have a bunch of software engineering resources at your disposal. So we wish you well with that. And I guess some of the questions that were coming in, that's really what it's centered around. Is it software? Is it firmware? And you're saying it's all basically it's firmware and updates from your end. Are there any chip level issues that are major roadblocks to any of these optimizations, or is it the
Nope.
chip solid?
Chips is solid.
Okay.
I've been kind of obsessing over some of the chatter about what it could be, right? Because first and foremost, we had to like sort of forensically reconstruct what happened.
Hmm.
When did we receive a report from a reviewer that seemed benign at first, but later we found, once the full picture was available, it was like the first early indicator that something was amiss. And sometimes you don't know until you have the gift of hindsight. And um, so I think we want to expose all that. The truth will set you free at the end of the day. And I believe very strongly that the reviewer community and the user community needs to hear it. We owe it to them, right? Because when too many companies in this world screw up and then aren't honest about it, they're not candid about it, and I'm not that way, and I'm fortunate to be in a position at Intel where I can drive an outcome that is different, and I will use my power for good to do it.
There you go. No,
That's
and
awesome to hear.
I'm
Appreciate the
chuckling, but
candor there.
it's refreshing. Yeah, it's great to hear.
So I know we got to move on from this, but I gotta needle you just one more time, just to see if we can get a little detail. Because really, the biggest question that was asked multiple times was related to game performance specifically.
Sure.
Is that one area you expect to improve once all these fixes are rolled out?
Absolutely.
Okay, perfect. So gamers, they're probably going to fix things. That's right? Where we are today.
I'll even be more candid.
Okay.
What we promised to the public and to the reviewer community is that Arrow Lake was roughly equivalent to Raptor Lake in gaming performance at substantially lower power with some cool new overclocking controls. I still fundamentally believe that is true. That is not what you saw in reviews, and our goal now is to bring our reality in line with everybody else's reality. Or I should say the other way around, right? Like we want to bring people onto the square we think we're on, or we know we're on, and we just didn't provide the right set of software firmware to make that true. And now we got to bring it together. So
got it.
Cool.
So those bars are going to be growing back up to where they should be.
Growing.
That's good. Good.
That's one of the interesting points. For if there's some folks that maybe haven't been entrenched in this space for as long as we three have been. It used to be a chip came out, and if it was broke, it was broke, right? That was it. There was no fixing anything. But there's so many things that are software controlled now and firmware controlled and microcontrollers that can be tweaked via software that the initial impression of something, when you go to retest something year later, it could be a totally different product. So of course, we're going to take Robert at his word here now. Robert has always been straightforward with us. He's a straight shooter. He's a good guy. Of course, we're going to test everything when it comes out. But yeah, you need to understand that all of this is possible. If you're thinking there's something broken in the silicon that can't be fixed, that is not always the case. So I just want to make sure that's clear for everybody.
That's exactly right.
Totally plausible. Trying to think, what was that? Anyways, and there was, I guess, there are other sorts of questions that are around this as well, in the reviewer space. With folks that are testing these machines and learning about the new architecture and the platform. Are there any areas that you feel the press missed in terms of performance benchmarks, measurements, evaluation, analysis, what have you? Any nuance there?
Press missing is not quite the description that I would use, because we didn't exactly gift them with the time to explore it. But I think there's a lot of goodness in overclocking for PC enthusiasts on this part, right? You have a ring frequency on the compute tile with a ton of headroom. You have a ton of headroom in the die-to-die frequencies. You have probably the best headroom in the industry on memory controller and memory itself. There is a fabric inside the I/O tile that has a pretty generous headroom. The E cores are super overclockable. Like there's a lot to tinker with in this product, and it's been a lot of fun playing with it. But because of the extant issues in the review cycle that, again, we unfortunately, that's on us, we didn't leave people with a lot of time to explore that. So it's not really that they missed it, it's just that they couldn't afford the time to go look. But if you if you do have that time and you do have one of these platforms, yeah, there's a lot of goodness there.
That's actually a perfect segue, because we had some chatter in the comments asking about if you're overclocking, do you have recommendations on areas of focus? Is it the next gen on core? Is it the die-to-die links? If you were starting from zero, learning how to overclock Arrow Lake, do you have any guidance for anybody at this point?
Well, based on my own personal experience, E-cores have a very generous headroom. My own personal 285K, which may not match everyone's 285K, but it is a boxed part, right? It's a retail part. I'm hitting 5 gigahertz on the E-cores, which is 500 megahertz up, and it's that's a hell of an upgrade. And then ring frequency on the CPU tile, so core to core, not seeing a lot of benefit there. And actually, Arrow Lake has roughly similar core latency versus Raptor Lake anyway, so it's like system agent fabric, or the fabric inside the IO tile, is pretty productive. Die-to-die is productive, and memory overclocking, great.
Okay.
Yep.
So,
Yeah,
so big gains for memory too. I'm sorry.
Well, because this product is disaggregated, memory overclocking isn't as straightforward as it would have been on Raptor Lake. It is more like other disaggregated architectures, that there's a couple links that exist between the memory controller and the CPU cores, right? So it's not just overclocking memory anymore. That does provide a benefit all on its own. Just making memory faster helps. I've seen upwards of 10% just from that, but in games. But thinking about the other links or the other frequencies that exist between the cores and the memory, speeding that whole chain up is very productive.
Got it.
And have you done any undervolting yet, Robert?
I have not.
You have not? Okay. That's always been an interesting way. Like I found that the best balance is find your lowest voltage first, then start tweaking. Then try to maybe increase your voltage to stock, and you have to put a nice balance without crazy heat.
Ooh, interesting.
But that's
so I've always
me. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I say that I'm super conservative, right? Because I want my systems to, if they crash, I'm screwed. If I'm writing a page in our CMS and my browser crashes, I just lost all that work. So I like to tweak for performance, but I can't go nuts. So I tend to be too conservative, maybe. So that was just my point of view on that one.
I tend to start from the other end. Like I try to leave the voltage stock first, and then see how far I can get with just that, and then, depending on how much voltage is stock, it does influence kind of the range above that I will explore, right? And just as an example, if something is only 0.5 volts or 500 millivolts, that should communicate to you. You should probably not go to like 1 volt or something, right? So 0.55, 0.6, right? That feels more conservative and realistic. But if we're talking, a voltage that's 1.3, 1.4, maybe I'll be a little more experimental with it. But yeah, I always like to start stock first.
Gotcha. Cool. I know you can't answer this outright, but it's going to make for interesting conversation, and it just came up in the chat a few minutes ago. Obviously, AMD, specifically targeting gamers with 3D V-cache. Is that something Intel would ever explore? Any reason to explore it with your architectures? Is there any color you can give in that regard?
Not at this time.
Not at this time. All right. Try it, everybody. Sorry. Cool. Dave, you got anything, or you want me to keep going with? Go ahead.
Let's pull one from the HotHardware comments section. Can you speak to Core Ultra 9 285K availability? Seems to be a little slim out there in the channel, and so I didn't know if you had any commentary you can offer folks on that.
Okay, so as an upfront disclaimer, I do not deal with supply or availability at Intel or at any point in my career. However, I think it is natural to understand or believe that because the launch didn't really go according to plan, that might depress availability a little bit, right? It just creates this atmosphere of sluggishness, I will suppose, that we need to get over. So I can't promise anything about supply because I don't deal with it, but you can understand, I think, why that might be.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, like I was checking availability earlier. It looks like lots of the system builders have them, but the retail DIY chips were much more scarce, obviously.
Yeah.
Right. And,
So
and
until
I think
you
it's
guys,
natural because DIYers are sensitive to many of the DIYers, the person, and DIYers, the companies that provide to those people. They're sensitive to the topics that we're talking about, and
Right.
so we need to do better.
Yep.
So once you get those fixes in, probably see a little bit better supply demand dynamic, or what have you.
That is my hope. And again, speaking as an official Intel employee, I cannot promise more supply. I'm not saying there will be more supply, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, that's my hope.
Not your bailiwick there. Got it. Got it.
Mine.
Yeah. So
Appreciate
we got some questions on the site about future memory technology support that I know Robert can't answer, but there's probably some color he can provide regarding memory, future memory technologies and performance here. So Arrow Lake's the first desktop processor to support CU DIMMs, and that technology in particular will facilitate higher memory clocks.
Yep.
How do I frame this question? Was the support for CU DIMMs brought in with this part to support those higher memory frequencies from a performance standpoint, or was this just sort of a future looking move because the memory industry was already going this direction?
It's a future looking move. I actually kind of think of CU DIMM as DDR 5.5 almost. Like it is a huge step function in transfer rates, which you are not going to get with baseline DIMMs with no clock driver. So it doesn't change the signaling, and it doesn't change capacities or anything like. There's no architectural changes, but it unleashes the next tier of performance for all memory vendors, all platform providers. The industry has been working on this for a while.
Yeah, and it was wild. I know these chips. The vast majority of them are obviously going to be used with a discrete GPU, but I always test the on processor graphics, and it was like, I think it was like the second fastest on processor graphics ever, mostly because of that fast memory. So pretty cool to see that tech supported. Yep. Go ahead, Dave. Am I cutting you off again?
No, not at all. I'm thinking of diving in and sharing some of the content creation benchmarks. But do we have any questions in that area? Maybe while I get this ready.
Nothing. Oh, go ahead, Dave. Go ahead, Robert. Sorry.
No, I was just looking at the question list as well.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, so that's actually that's an interesting point. I don't think we got like a specific content creation related question, but in my experience so far, I've had the Arrow Lake system is my test rig is arm's length away from me right here, and I've been playing with it for a couple of weeks now. That's one area where performance is particularly strong, right? In my opinion, you have this really high memory bandwidth, relatively speaking. So, like that Blackmagic Raw, it's very memory bandwidth sensitive. So, Arrow Lake, top of the charts, fastest perf we've seen. Arrow Lake was also the 285K fastest we've seen in Cinebench. Can you provide some information on how you're able to achieve such high performance in these traditionally multi-threaded apps, but with those fewer threads?
Right.
Yeah. So this is the actual advantage, and in the Cinebench case, one of the actual advantages of removing SMT, which seems counterintuitive, but it means so the one of the architectural problems with SMT is it requires every core, you're essentially taking some of that die space that could have been spent on more performance for every workload, and instead allocating it towards a duplication of like the thread scheduling and dispatch pieces, the virtual core parts of the architecture. And in point of fact, like that for workloads like this, like if you design an entirely different architecture, assuming that SMT won't be there, you can squeeze out much more performance from the core than you would have if you had one with SMT, right? Because now you're able to spend those transistors in that logic design differently, in a highly scalable performance that clearly affects workloads like 3D ray trace renderers. And then in the case of some of that 8K decode and stuff, that's actually our graphics engine. We have invested a ton of time into our encode decode engines in graphics to be really good at 4K and 8K content, precisely because so many artists are using just enthusiast desktops called workstations, to work on this type of content, right? If you're a Hollywood artist or a professional 3D artist, you probably have a hugely multi-core CPU sitting at your desk, and that may not be your render box, but it could be, or it's one you transport to the job site. And everything in professional video now is originally mastered at 8K and then downsized to 4K or 1080p or whatever. So we've invested a ton of time in making sure that these advanced codecs and these advanced resolutions are the best. And this is a direct advantage of the disaggregation of the architecture, right? Because you can provide better scalability now and include new functionality, and you're not really trading off the essentials that people want, right? You can still deliver better core performance, faster 1T, better NT, but also bring in new decode, new graphics, new encode around the compute tile, and deliver a better overall result.
Nice. Yeah, there you go. Top 3 spots in Blackmagic Raw 8K raw image decode. So yeah, good stuff.
One thing, I want to make sure that we get to this because I think it got lost in all of the chatter after the launch. Let's talk about the platform a little bit, right? Because the 800 series chipset, a lot of good stuff going on with this platform in terms of PCIe 5 support, Thunderbolt support. Why don't you give your high level? Hey, this is why you should love this platform for Arrow Lake.
For those who have known me for a long time, you will know that, and my past years of my career, you will know that I'm pleased to finally be able to talk about Thunderbolt. Having Thunderbolt 4 and 5 on these platforms is super, super convenient. I'm running webcam and an Ethernet controller and some other stuff off of my laptop to do this, and it's all off of one USB-C Thunderbolt 4 port. And I think that's incredibly convenient. And Thunderbolt is one of those technologies, like it's hard to understand how much you appreciate it until you actually try it yourself, and you're like, man, how did I live without this? Because it is so convenient. So I think that's one perk of the platform. I also really love the PCI Express lane assortment. There's just a ton of lanes on the part, which is awesome. They're a mix of Gen 5, Gen 4. You can stuff a ton of SSDs and graphics into it, which is great. I love that I can put in 2 NVMEs and a discrete GPU, and I'm not losing PCI Express bandwidth, which is not always the case on other platforms. You're not splitting lanes or bifurcating lanes. So those are 2 standouts for me. Plus, as a platform, again, really resilient to overclocking and tinkering, which is my bread and butter. So
someone when I look at my day-to-day workflow, having fast storage and that really fast single thread, right, that responsiveness from a single thread, that makes the most impact to my day-to-day computing. I game, right, but I game on a 4K display, and any differences that I may be able to show in a 1080p medium benchmark doesn't manifest at 4K with higher quality settings. So there's all this other stuff to consider. It's a wild industry when you look at the length of a bar and a bar chart. It doesn't really always tell the whole story if you're not understanding how you use your PC. But
yeah, and I'm not gonna in no way demean the 1080p low or 720p testing. But for me, it's me personally, as a computer buyer sitting in front of a huge triple screen setup with a highly overclocked system, those benchmarks are actually totally irrelevant to me as a consumer, right? As a buyer of PCs, right? I have a 1440p ultra wide. That's what I'm staring at right now, and on the sides 4K, both 4K. So I have to actually go out of my way to find those results because they're still not super common in reviews, but that data is more relevant to how I use my PC.
Yeah.
But understanding that 1080p is still the plurality and 720p good micro benchmark, I am not besmirching those in any way, but it's like there's a little bit of a disconnect between how to test to expose differences and then how to buy to do the thing that you actually want to do.
Right.
Yeah, we actually show, both the lower res to let the CPUs sort of stretch their legs as far as they can, and then we show the high res, and it's amazing how the bar graph just goes wheat, and everybody lines right back up.
Whoop. Yeah,
when it's GPU bound, which is where most people with a powerful workstation type rig game is. 1440p with a decent graphics card. I mean, you do have some certainly esports gamers that crank some pretty high frame rates, on the
and that's like a completely different set of buying requirements, right? Like no amount of frames is enough, no amount of hertz on the monitor is enough. There are competitive and input latency reasons for that. Totally get it. It's just not me. I just don't do competitive esports games.
Right.
And Robert, there was I don't want to say concern or really chatter, because the most I heard about this was from motherboard vendors and companies that make coolers. But the CPU cores are like offset from the center with Arrow Lake, and some vendors are coming out with little offset mounts to get the coolers sort of better centered to bring temps down a little bit. Was that any discussion inside Intel before this launch? Was it a non-issue for Intel? Are these cooler folks just trying to differentiate? And any color you can provide there?
Not a huge concern for us, I think. I actually haven't looked at the reviews on these offset coolers. I imagine it's a couple degrees Celsius.
Yeah, it's like 3 degrees. It's nothing.
I mean, that could be a thermal paste change, right? You can get 3 degrees out of a thermal paste. But it's great that the industry will respond in this way to give people these sorts of choices. Me personally, I'm not going to quibble over 3C. I'm just going to probably continue reusing my Noctua NHD19 until the heat death of the universe. But but I totally get it. If you're building an all new platform, why not buy the best possible thing for what you want to do? So again, not a huge concern for us, but we're glad cooler vendors are doing it.
Got it. Cool.
I'm just going to feature. I'm sorry, Marco, go ahead.
No, I keep cutting you off and I feel bad. I think I have a little delay, so you take over.
It's all right. I'm just going to feature this question in from Patrick. We sort of, we covered it pretty much, or Robert covered it. These updates to optimize performance with Core Ultra 200 series are going to come via Windows update, but it is really not a Redmond problem, right, Robert?
That's exactly right. So, I want to be very clear. Microsoft is a close partner of ours, and I think they get a lot of flack sometimes, unearned flack, from the general public. And I'm getting a little controversial here, but I saw the chatter post launch, and a lot of it had unkind things to say about Windows. And I want to be very clear that this was not a Windows problem. It's not 24H2. It's not any update applied to 24H2. It's not Windows, right? These are unfortunately self-inflicted problems, and we need to fix them. And yeah, we'll provide some of those via Windows Update because it's expedient. But again, that doesn't mean Microsoft did it.
Yeah. Well, we're looking forward to those optimizations. It'd be nice to get some performance back. Absolutely.
Yeah, you know what? I know, Robert, this one, it might be touchy. I know you're not going to throw anybody under the bus, but I also want to give, if there's an opportunity for you guys to, let me just ask this question. This launch was handled a little bit differently externally. Like normally when, for the many years I've been reviewing processors for HotHardware, the CPU maker will send a kit to test the chips. That's not how this one went, and it was multiple folks sending stuff, and just the processors came from you. Were there disconnects in communications with some partners, or was this fully some internal Intel missteps that caused this launch not to go as planned?
Without getting into the details, yes, there were definitely communication missteps. And again, I really think those were unfortunately on us. There's an entire, outside of the performance related issues that we're talking about, internally, we also have to drive a set of new cultures and new behaviors that will prevent these issues from happening again, right? So if you have a process problem or a procedural issue that can result in these outcomes, you also need to do a valid postmortem to correct the processes or procedures that led to these outcomes. And we're not going to get into that with the public, but we acutely and personally feel the heat on this topic, right? I and many of my peers have been on calls once or twice a day for the past 2 weeks to try to figure this out. First, to root cause what actually happened, reverse engineer it, and then build the plan to make it right. And then once all that's done, you can actually sit back and go, okay, what do we do about this, long term, to make sure it doesn't happen again? But to the fundamental question, there were communication issues with partners that we need to fix.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Cool.
This just came in as an aside. I think what they're saying there is, will general performance increase from the fixes, not just gaming performance?
Oh, I see. I misunderstood HEDT. I think so. I have some early indicators that there are non-gaming cases that will also benefit as well, and we'll get into that when we do the public digest on it.
Awesome.
Cool.
And what else we got, Marco?
Nothing. I was just going to try to trip Robert up, but I was going to.
Don't do it.
No, I was going to say, so how's Battle Mage testing with 285K? It's go.
I don't know. I don't deal in graphics.
Just messing with you, man.
Oh man, we're gonna strive not to get Robert into too much trouble.
Yeah, no, Robert can handle anything we throw at him. Known him for many years here. I am scrolling through the chat. Let me just see what I missed, because it just jumped on me and I lost my place. Give me 2 seconds.
I hate when you're doing that. Like, you're scrolling through Instagram and you're like, ooh, I'm going to send this reel to my wife. And then you click you just scroll a little too far and it just resets. And you're like, well, yeah, okay, never going to find that again.
It normally doesn't do that inside the StreamYard interface, but it did for me today. But go ahead, Dave. Sorry.
So I know you can't talk too much about future products here, but there's been a question asked in the HotHardware comment section about lower powered Core Ultra 200 series processors, specifically in the 65 watt range. Can we expect additional fleshing out of the family, maybe?
Yep.
Oh, that's actually an answer. I didn't, necessarily think we were going to get one.
There you go.
But yeah. Okay. Excellent. Cool.
Yeah. So there was, I'm going to ask this question slightly different than it was in the chat. It seemed that both AMD and now you guys, with your new chips, right? The initial launch didn't go quite as planned, right? Was there any sort of additional pressures to get these out the door faster? Were there any missteps leading to the launch that you wish didn't happen, or perhaps that you waited a little bit longer?
I mean, I'm still trying to reverse engineer some of the particulars inside. I don't think there was like an external pressure to launch when we did, but launching in October means you're in the first month of the last quarter, and companies recognized revenue on a quarterly basis, right? So if you go into the quarter late on a launch, you are hurting yourself as a company, right? So I think there is an alternative world where we had different processes and different procedures and would have been healthy with an October launch, but that obviously did not happen. And so next time we need to be a little more careful up front, and take some of these learnings into account.
Yeah,
Got it. Fair enough.
it's a delicate balance. Marco and I have done in our other roles as analysts. We've done some homework and research for clients where looking at launch strategies, and it's kind of like if the sun and the moon and the stars align properly, you actually hit a launch 100% square, nail in the head kind of thing. You have to have execution at the chip level, the software level, and then it's okay. What do you do for investors, from a timing standpoint?
There's a
It's a
ton
lot.
of sausage making internally that go
Yeah.
into these launches. Like I know we're talking primarily to like an enthusiast audience, but that is part of the reality too, right?
Yeah.
Intel also has OEM customers and pre-built system customers, and they're thinking about holiday season and refresh systems, and like we have to think about leaving time to execute CES properly, right? There's this massive stack up of other concerns that are actually somewhat invisible to the enthusiast audience. And that does, as you allude to, factor into how these launches get made and when they get timed.
Yeah. Yep.
Yep. And I think we're running up to the end here. I'm gonna set you up to go to town, Robert. Right. So Intel's you're closing out 24 with a brand new mobile platform in Lunar Lake, closing out the year with a brand new desktop platform with Arrow Lake. By the time CES is over, right? Are you guys confident you have the leading platforms in both areas with Lunar Lake and Arrow Lake?
Well, we are going to fill out the portfolio, right? We've told people already that we're working on H and HX parts for Arrow Lake. You'll see those at CES. Like I hope that doesn't get me in trouble to say that. That should be a foregone conclusion to everyone, though.
I think you guys have said that publicly.
Yeah, I think so. And we gotta bring Lunar Lake into commercial spaces, which is Intel's very biggest market. Business customers, enterprise customers. And that will be, by the time we get to CES, you will see the full portfolio, everything we plan for Arrow and Lunar.
Cool.
I
So
feel good.
Paul Alcorn jumps in at the last minute, thought he was too late.
Well,
but you're never too late, Paul. We're here for you, brother. Paul's asking, how much does the new architecture play into launch issues? Like he says, is there a Zen 1 vibe with Intel's first tile-based chip?
I truly believe that it is not a function of disaggregation. It's not memory latency. It's not die-to-die. Like if you zoom out to 1,000 feet, like those two moments look the same. But once we started to figure out like the interior of the challenges that we had faced, we quickly realized it's not the same, right? The details really matter here in the analogy, and I just don't see the parallels architecturally.
Yeah, you folks have been, in the disaggregated tile chip design for a while now. Meteor Lake, Lunar Lake. I mean, you've done this in production, granted in lower power envelope vehicles like laptops, but it scales, right? In terms of power envelope on the desktop too. So that makes sense. It's not like this is your first rodeo with a chiplet style design.
right. And that's okay. That's actually one of the details I can get into, right? Zen 1 was new motherboard, new architecture, new platform, first time disaggregating, like a million new things that have never been done or seen before by the company. And that's very different from this, where we actually have quite a bit of experience and well understand the puts and takes. And no disrespect to my competition, they make a wonderful CPU. They learned very quickly. I enjoyed deeply my time there working on those parts, right? It's good to have an enthusiastic, challenging competitor. It's good. It keeps you humble, and it's good for the public. So, but yeah, we've learned a lot over the last. When did Zen 1 launch? 2016, right? That's 8 years later. We're 8 years on, and or 2017, I think. So 7 years.
2017.
It's an eternity.
And so yeah, we've learned a lot, and we've made a lot of disaggregated parts already, and that's what I mean when it's like the high notes are similar, but the full detail not quite the same.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And so to bottom line it here, more to come in the weeks
More to
ahead,
come.
maybe end of November-ish, early December, in terms of improving Arrow Lake performance. You guys are hot on it, and you're gonna deliver it, right?
That's the goal. Like I guess I want to. I do also want to say thank you to guys like you, the reviewer community at large, right? I know you dislike running into these platform challenges, right? Because it sucks up review time. You're fighting with an OS blue screen here. My system doesn't boot over here, and like you guys have maybe 2 weeks max to look at these things.
Yeah.
And but as painful as this launch was, a lot of us deeply value and appreciate the feedback that reviewers gave us, because it was detailed enough to start to unpack what happened. Now I never again want to use the reviewer community to find these problems, right?
Right.
Obviously that's an unhealthy relationship, but I am grateful. All of us are grateful. So if you are in the reviewer community and you are watching this, or Dave, Marco, both of you, thanks. I mean, you're directly responsible for helping us figure this out and get it right. And we owe it to you to explain what happened, right? Because we cost you time, and we're going to do better.
No, that's great to hear, Robert. And hey, that's the way this thing is supposed to work, by the way. I mean,
It is.
granted, you guys would have liked perhaps a better foot forward in spots with Arrow Lake on the launch day. But yeah, if you guys are listening, right? If Intel's listening to the feedback, the input, and you're taking it to heart, and then you're acting upon it, that's all anybody can ask, I think.
I hope so.
So that's good stuff. Anything else, Marco, before we let this poor guy off the hook?
I don't think so. I think that was a great discussion, and I love when Robert's on. He's always so straightforward and gives awesome info. So thank you, Robert. I thought that was great. Everyone in the chat, it's your last chance. We have to let Robert get to other meetings, but yeah, no, I think
I've got another
awesome.
one coming up.
Awesome.
All right. Well, we will bid you adieu, Robert Hallock of Intel. We thank you so much for your time today. It's been a pleasure as always. Good to see you again, my friend. And yeah, keep the good fight. We'll look to hear more from your team in the near weeks ahead on updating Arrow Lake a little bit more to tweak some performance out of it and stability and all that good stuff.
Exactly right. Thanks both of you for having me on. Appreciate the opportunity. Appreciate the time as always. And I'll see you both at CES.
Absolutely. And folks, yes, you can find us on the web at HotHardware, twitter.com/HotHardware, youtube.com/HotHardware. We're everywhere. We will definitely be at CES, boots on the ground, meeting with folks at Intel and all the major players. So make sure you stop by. Hit like and subscribe if you would, so you get notified when we go streaming. And until then, thanks for stopping by. And thanks so much for Robert Hallock from Intel today.
And also feed that YouTube algo and comment after the live stream is over. Get those comments going.
There you go.
Too. Thank you.
Yeah. We want to hack the system here. Let's go, baby. All right. Thanks everybody for stopping by. Take care.